Millionaire gives $500 to a homeless man, and the next day sees him placing flowers on the grave of his missing daughter from 20 years ago. A millionaire known for being cold and distant after leaving an important meeting decides to give $500 to a homeless man who was insisting on just having a moment to tell his story. Without wanting to listen, the millionaire throws the money and walks away. The next day, visiting the cemetery for the 20th anniversary of his daughter's disappearance, he freezes when he sees the same homeless man kneeling in front of his daughter's tomb, leaving flowers. Curious and suspicious, the millionaire approaches and questions the man, who hesitates, but eventually reveals that he was the secret best friend of his daughter, who ran away from home because of a big family secret that the millionaire never knew. The homeless man then hands the millionaire a letter that the daughter had written shortly before disappearing, where she revealed the truth about her mother, a secret that could change everything the millionaire believed. The letter reveals that the daughter never died, but was taken in by a humble family after running away because she was afraid of her own father. And the homeless man? He was the only one who knew she was alive. Shocked and remorseful, the millionaire promises to help him get back on his feet, but the real dilemma begins. Should he go after the daughter who rejected him or respect her new life? The gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan cast long shadows across Wall Street as Richard Hartley stepped out of the towering Platinum Investments headquarters. His tailored Brioni suit and polished Berluti shoes spoke of a lifetime of calculated success. A man who had built an empire through cold strategic decisions. At 55, Richard was known throughout New York's financial circles as the Ice King, a moniker he wore with a strange pride. His reputation for ruthless business tactics was matched only by his emotional detachment from everything and everyone around him. The recent merger that had just concluded was another testament to his legendary negotiation skills, adding another multi-million-dollar victory to his already impressive portfolio. The bustling financial district hummed with energy, suits rushing in every direction, smartphones glued to ears, but Richard moved with a deliberate, almost mechanical precision. His steel-gray eyes scanned the environment, not with curiosity, but with the same analytical gaze he used to dissect corporate balance sheets. As he approached his midnight black Mercedes S-Class, a weathered figure caught his peripheral vision. A homeless man, probably in his early 60s, stood near the street corner. Unlike the typical panhandlers who aggressively sought attention, this man simply stood quietly, holding a small cardboard sign that read, "Just need a moment to share my story." Richard's first instinct was to ignore him, as he had done countless times before. But something in the man's posture, a dignity that seemed incongruent with his ragged appearance, made him pause. "Sir," the homeless man said softly, not moving. "Closer. I know you're busy, but would you spare just a moment?" Normally, Richard would have walked past without a second glance, but today, perhaps influenced by the morning's successful business negotiations, something unexpected happened. He stopped. "You have 30 seconds, Richard said curtly, checking his platinum Patek Philippe watch. The man's eyes, surprisingly clear and intelligent, met Richard's. They were the eyes of someone who had seen much but remained unbroken. "I'm not asking for money," he began, "just a chance to be heard." Richard's impatience grew. The street was noisy, people bumped against him, and he had a lunch meeting with potential investors. Yet something in the man's gaze held a mysterious intensity. "Look," Richard said, reaching into his wallet, "I don't have time for a story. Here's $500. Take it and find somewhere else to be." He thrust the bills at the man and turned to leave. The homeless man didn't immediately take the money, which struck Richard as odd. Most people in his situation would have grabbed the cash immediately. "Thank you," the man said quietly, his voice carrying an unexpected weight of emotion. Richard was already walking away, the brief encounter already fading from his mind. Little did he know that this seemingly insignificant moment would become the first thread in a tapestry of revelation that would unravel everything he thought he knew about his life. The Mercedes pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the mysterious homeless man, a silent witness to a story about to unfold. As the car merged into Manhattan's relentless traffic, Richard Hartley had no idea that the next 24 hours would challenge everything he believed about himself, his family, and the carefully constructed world he had created. The following morning, Richard Hartley's routine remained unchanged. Every year on this particular date, he visited the cemetery where a memorial plaque commemorated his daughter's mysterious disappearance 2 decades ago. Sophia Hartley had vanished without a trace when she was 22, leaving behind a void that Richard had never truly processed. His wife Eleanor had been devastated, but Richard's response was typically pragmatic, hiring private investigators, creating missing person campaigns, but always maintaining an emotional distance. As his chauffeur navigated through the quiet suburban streets of Westchester, Richard's mind drifted to memories he typically suppressed. Sophia had been different from him, passionate, rebellious, with a heart that seemed too large for the calculated world he inhabited. The cemetery was peaceful, surrounded by ancient oak trees and meticulously maintained gardens. Richard's expensive Italian leather shoes made no sound on the manicured path as he approached the memorial marker. What happened next would alter the trajectory of his entire existence. Kneeling beside the memorial was a familiar figure, the same homeless man from yesterday. In his weathered hands, he carefully placed a small bouquet of white lilies, Sophia's favorite flower. Richard froze, a sensation he rarely experienced flooding his system, pure, unadulterated shock. "You," he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and growing intensity. "What are you doing here?" The homeless man looked up, his eyes holding a depth of knowledge that immediately unsettled Richard. There was recognition, pain, and something else, a secret waiting to be unveiled. "I knew Sophia," the man said quietly. "Better than anyone ever did." Those simple words would become the catalyst for a journey that would challenge everything Richard believed about his past, his family, and the carefully constructed narrative of loss he had maintained for 2 decades. The silence between Richard and the homeless man stretched like an invisible thread, charged with unspoken revelations. Richard's mind raced, analyzing the unexpected encounter with the same strategic precision he applied to his business negotiations. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice a controlled blend of authority and barely contained curiosity. The man slowly stood, revealing a surprising dignity that contradicted his ragged appearance. "My name is Michael Rodriguez," he said, "and I was Sophia's closest confidant during the most challenging time of her life." Richard's world, built on precise calculations and emotional barriers, began to crack. Michael's presence was like an unexpected variable in a carefully balanced equation. "I knew Sophia was struggling," Michael continued, "long before she disappeared. She was carrying a burden that was consuming her, a family secret that threatened to destroy everything she knew." The cemetery around them seemed to fade, becoming a backdrop to this extraordinary moment of potential revelation. Richard's expensive watch ticked silently, marking each passing second of this surreal conversation. Michael reached into a worn messenger bag, incongruous with his homeless appearance, and pulled out a weathered envelope. "She asked me to keep this safe," he said, holding the letter as if it were a fragile piece of history. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the envelope. The paper looked aged, with Sophia's distinctive handwriting visible through the translucent envelope. Years of suppressed emotions began to surface: confusion, hope, and a deep, unexplored sense of loss. "Before I give you this," Michael said, his tone becoming serious, "you need to understand that some truths are more complex than they appear. What you're about to learn will challenge everything you believe about your family's history." The morning sunlight filtered through the cemetery's oak trees, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the weight of untold secrets. Richard Hartley, a man who had built an empire on understanding complex financial systems, now found himself confronting a mystery far more intricate than any business deal he had ever negotiated. Little did he know that this moment would be the first step in a journey that would unravel the carefully constructed facade of his life, revealing layers of truth he could never have anticipated. Michael's eyes held a mixture of compassion and determination, the look of someone who had carried a significant burden for far too long and was finally ready to release its weight. "Are you prepared to hear the truth?" Michael asked, the envelope still held between them like a bridge connecting two worlds that had been separated for 2 decades. Richard's fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as he accepted the envelope. The paper felt fragile, like a whisper of memories long suppressed. Michael watched intently, his eyes reflecting a complex mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Inside the cemetery's quiet sanctuary, surrounded by marble monuments and silent memories, Richard carefully opened the letter. Sophia's distinctive handwriting, elegant yet passionate, immediately transported him to memories of her childhood. The first line struck him like an unexpected wave. "Dear Dad, if you're reading this, it means the truth can no longer remain hidden. Our family's perfect facade has been built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies." Richard's breath caught. Sophia's words were deliberate, each sentence carefully crafted to reveal something profound. Michael remained silent, allowing the moment to unfold with a respectful distance. The letter detailed a complex narrative that challenged everything Richard believed about his family's history. Sophia had discovered a secret about her mother, Eleanor, a revelation so significant that it had driven her to make an impossible choice, disappearing to protect those she loved. Eleanor was not who everyone thought she was, the letter continued. Her past was a carefully constructed narrative, a protection mechanism that began long before I was born. The woman you married had a completely different identity, one she had meticulously hidden from everyone, including you. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his body language suggesting he knew more than the letter revealed. Richard looked up, his steel-grey eyes demanding additional context. "Your wife," Michael said softly, "had a history that would change everything you understand about your family." The revelation hung in the air, heavy with implications. Richard's mind, typically sharp and analytical, struggled to process the information. How could Elena, his wife of 30 years, have been living under a fabricated identity? Sophia's letter hinted at complex circumstances involving Elena's background, suggestions of a past that involved international connections, hidden identities, and a web of secrets that stretched far beyond their seemingly perfect suburban life. "I'm protecting you by leaving," the letter concluded. "Some truths are better discovered gradually, not all at once. Trust that everything I'm doing is to preserve our family's true essence." Richard's world, built on precision and control, began to crumble. The man who had navigated complex corporate landscapes with surgical efficiency now found himself navigating an emotional terrain more challenging than any business negotiation. Michael watched, understanding the weight of the moment. He knew this was just the beginning of a journey that would transform Richard Hartley's understanding of his entire existence. "Would you like to know more?" Michael asked, his voice a delicate balance between offering information and respecting the emotional tsunami Richard was experiencing. The cemetery around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Richard's response. The weight of Sophia's revelations pressed against Richard's consciousness like a persistent fog. Michael's presence remained a constant, silent reminder that this journey of discovery was far from over. "I need context," Richard demanded, his voice a controlled blend of vulnerability and authority. "How did you know my daughter? Why were you so close to her?" Michael's weathered hands clasped together, a gesture that suggested years of carrying an emotional burden. "Sophia and I met during a critical period of her life, a time when she was searching for her true identity, questioning everything she had been told." The story unfolded like a carefully constructed puzzle. Sophia had been a brilliant graduate student in sociology, her research ironically focused on identity and family dynamics. Her personal investigation had begun innocently: old family, documents, subtle inconsistencies in her mother's background, fragments of conversations overheard during childhood. She discovered discrepancies, Michael explained. Birth certificates, immigration records, family histories, nothing completely aligned. Eleanor's past was a labyrinth of carefully constructed narratives. Richard listened, his professional composure slowly giving way to a more human vulnerability. The man who had built financial empires with cold calculation now found himself navigating the most complex terrain of all: his own family's hidden truth. Your wife, Michael continued, had connections that extended far beyond what you knew. International networks, complex relationships that predated your marriage. Sophia was determined to understand why. The revelation hung in the air, challenging everything Richard believed about his life. Eleanor, his refined, seemingly traditional wife, had layers of complexity he had never imagined. Sophia wasn't running away, Michael said softly. She was protecting you, protecting the family from a truth that could potentially destroy everything you had built. A gentle breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling leaves that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Richard's mind raced, connecting fragments of memories, subtle moments he had dismissed over the years, now taking on new, profound meanings. Small inconsistencies began to surface. Elena's occasional hesitation when discussing her family background, her precise, almost calculated way of managing personal information, the carefully curated narrative of their life together. What exactly was she protecting us from? Richard asked, his voice a mixture of fear and desperate curiosity. Michael's eyes held a depth of knowledge that suggested the answer was both simple and extraordinarily complex. That, he said, is a story that requires more than just words. It requires understanding, compassion, and a willingness to see beyond the surface. The memorial plaque for Sophia seemed to watch them, a silent witness to this extraordinary moment of revelation. Richard Hartley, the man who had controlled every aspect of his professional life, now found himself completely vulnerable, standing at the precipice of a truth that would change everything. "Are you ready to hear the full story?" Michael asked, his voice a delicate invitation to a journey of unprecedented discovery. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the cemetery, creating an atmospheric backdrop for the unfolding narrative. Richard's mind wrestled with the mounting revelations, his professional composure gradually giving way to a more vulnerable human response. "Start from the beginning," he demanded, his voice a controlled mixture of desperation and determination. Michael's story began in the late 1980s, a period of significant global political transitions. Eleanor, whose real name was not Elena, had connections that stretched across international boundaries. Her background was a complex tapestry of diplomatic networks, international relations, and carefully guarded secrets. She worked in a specialized diplomatic unit, Michael explained, one that operated in the shadows of international negotiations. "Your wife wasn't just a traditional homemaker. She was a highly skilled professional with connections that spanned continents." Richard's mind reeled. The woman he thought he knew, the perfect suburban wife, the dedicated mother, was apparently a multifaceted individual with a history far more intricate than he could have imagined. Sophia had been the first to uncover these layers. Her academic training in sociology, combined with her natural investigative instinct, had allowed her to piece together fragments of her mother's hidden past. She discovered diplomatic communications, encrypted documents, and a network of relationships that existed long before her parents' marriage. "Your daughter was brilliant," Michael said, a hint of pride in his voice. She understood that family histories are never as simple as they appear. Each document, each conversation, was a potential key to understanding the larger narrative. The revelations challenged everything Richard believed about his family's history. Eleanor had carefully constructed her identity, creating a life that appeared traditional on the surface, while maintaining complex international connections. "Why did she hide all of this?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. Michael's response was measured. Protection, not just of herself but of you and Sophia. Some truths, when exposed, can create dangerous ripple effects. The cemetery around them seemed to hold its breath, the ancient oak trees standing as silent witnesses to this extraordinary moment of revelation. Richard's perfectly structured world was crumbling, replaced by a narrative more complex and fascinating than any business deal he had ever negotiated. "Sophia discovered something specific," Michael continued, "a connection that could potentially destabilize everything your family believed about its own history." Richard leaned forward, his expensive suit momentarily forgotten, his entire being focused on understanding the mystery that had consumed his daughter's life. "What connection?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a delicate, potentially explosive thread. Michael's eyes reflected a combination of compassion and caution. The next revelation would change everything, and they both knew it. "Are you truly prepared to hear the truth?" he asked, offering Richard a final moment of hesitation before crossing a point of no return. The afternoon light continued to shift, casting intricate shadows that seemed to dance with the weight of untold secrets. The silence between Richard and Michael became a living entity, charged with anticipation and unspoken truths. Richard's professional demeanor had completely dissolved, replaced by a raw, almost desperate hunger for understanding. Eleanor's background was far more complex than a simple diplomatic career, Michael began, choosing his words with surgical precision. She was part of a specialized international network that operated between government agencies, handling sensitive information that could reshape geopolitical landscapes. Richard's mind struggled to reconcile this image with the woman he had known for decades. The Elena he remembered was a refined suburban wife, passionate about her garden, involved in local charity events, meticulous about family dinners. Your wife had multiple identities, Michael continued, each carefully crafted, each serving a specific purpose. Sophia discovered that Elena's true heritage was dramatically different from the narrative she had constructed. A series of photographs emerged from Michael's worn messenger bag. Grainy images from the 1980s showed a younger Elena, or the woman who had been Elena, in locations spanning Eastern Europe, parts of South America, and unexpected diplomatic outposts. She wasn't just collecting information, Michael explained. She was actively managing complex international networks, creating communication channels that most government agencies couldn't even imagine. Richard's hands trembled slightly. The woman he thought he knew completely disappeared, replaced by this multifaceted individual with a life of extraordinary complexity. Sophia's research had uncovered something more profound. Eleanor had not just been an observer in these international networks, she had been a key architect, someone who could manipulate information and create diplomatic solutions that existed beyond traditional governmental structures. "Your daughter was protecting you," Michael said softly. She understood that exposing Elena's true background could create significant complications. Some secrets, when revealed, can have consequences that extend far beyond a single family. The photographs told a story of a woman who had lived multiple lives simultaneously. Diplomatic receptions, covert meetings, strategic negotiations, all carefully hidden behind the facade of a traditional suburban life. "Why did she choose this life?" Richard asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and growing admiration. Michael's response was measured. "Some people are born with an extraordinary capacity to navigate complex global landscapes. Helena was one of those rare individuals who could exist in multiple worlds simultaneously." The afternoon light continued to shift, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Richard's understanding of his entire life began to transform, each revelation adding another layer to a story more complex than any business negotiation he had ever encountered. "Sophia discovered something specific," Michael said, his tone suggesting that the most significant revelation was yet to come. "A connection that could potentially change everything you understand about your family's history." Richard leaned forward, his entire being focused on uncovering the final piece of this extraordinary puzzle. "What connection?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a delicate, potentially explosive thread. The weight of Michael's revelations pressed against Richard's consciousness like a persistent tide. Each moment of disclosure challenged everything he believed about his family's carefully constructed narrative. "Your daughter didn't just stumble upon her mother's secret," Michael explained, his voice taking on a more intense tone. "She was systematically unraveling a complex network of international connections that traced back generations. Sophia's research had uncovered a stunning genealogical map that extended far beyond their immediate family. Eleanor's lineage was not just a simple diplomatic history, but an intricate web of global connections that spanned continents and generations. There's a specific bloodline," Michael continued, pulling out a meticulously hand-drawn family tree, "that connects your wife to a series of influential diplomatic families across Europe and South America. Each generation played a crucial role in maintaining delicate international relationships. Richard's analytical mind began processing the information. The document before him was no ordinary family history. It was a complex network of strategic connections, marriages that were more political arrangements than romantic unions. Sophia discovered something extraordinary, Michael said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. A connection that would fundamentally alter your understanding of your family's true identity. The photographs Michael had shown earlier began to make sense. Elena was not just a diplomatic operative. She was part of a generational network of information brokers, individuals who navigated global political landscapes with unprecedented skill. Your wife's family, Michael explained, had been maintaining these international networks for generations. Diplomatic immunity, strategic information exchange, creating bridges between cultures and governments. This was their true profession. Richard's world continued to transform. The woman he thought he knew, the suburban wife who hosted perfect dinner parties and managed their household with precision, was actually a descendant of an extraordinary lineage of global strategists. Sophia had been the first to fully comprehend the magnitude of this heritage. Her academic training in sociology had given her the tools to understand the complex social dynamics that had shaped her mother's life. Why did Elena choose to hide all of this? Richard asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and growing respect. Michael's response was carefully measured. Protection. Some networks operate most effectively when they remain invisible. Elena was continuing a family tradition of strategic discretion. The afternoon light continued to shift, creating an almost theatrical backdrop to this extraordinary revelation. Richard Hartley, the man who had built financial empires through strategic thinking, was now confronting a family history more complex than any business negotiation. Sophia was preparing to reveal this, Michael said, but something happened that changed everything. Richard leaned forward, sensing that the most critical revelation was about to emerge. The delicate thread of family history hung in the balance, ready to unravel completely. "What happened?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The cemetery around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next piece of this extraordinary puzzle to fall into place. The afternoon light began to soften, casting long shadows across the cemetery as Michael prepared to unveil the most critical piece of their extraordinary narrative. Richard sat motionless, every fiber of his being focused on understanding the mystery that had consumed his daughter's life. The connection Sophia discovered went beyond diplomatic networks, Michael began, his voice carrying a weight of carefully measured revelation. It was personal, a truth that would fundamentally alter everything you believed about your family's origin. Michael pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound journal, Sophia's personal documentation of her research. The pages were filled with meticulous notes, interconnected diagrams, and fragments of conversations that suggested a narrative far more complex than a simple family history. Elena's true background, he explained, was not just about diplomatic connections. It was about a specific lineage, a family line that had been strategically positioned across global networks for generations. The journal revealed a stunning genealogical map. Eleanor's family wasn't just involved in diplomatic circles. They were architects of international information networks, individuals who could navigate and manipulate global political landscapes with unprecedented skill. Richard's mind raced. The woman he thought he knew, the perfect suburban wife, was actually a descendant of an extraordinary line of global strategists. Each generation had played a crucial role in maintaining delicate international relationships, often working in the shadows of traditional diplomatic channels. Sophia discovered something more profound, Michael continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. A connection that traced back to a specific international network, one that existed beyond traditional governmental structures. The journal contained encrypted notes, fragments of conversations and connections that suggested a family history far more intricate than anyone could have imagined. Elena had not just been a passive participant in these networks, she had been a key architect. Your daughter was preparing to reveal this, Michael said, But something happened that forced her to make an impossible choice. Richard leaned forward, sensing that the most critical revelation was about to emerge. The delicate thread of family history hung in the balance, ready to unravel completely. "What choice?" he asked, his voice a mixture of desperation and growing anticipation. Michael's eyes reflected a complex mixture of compassion and caution. The next revelation would change everything, and they both knew it. "Sophia discovered a truth about her own identity," he said slowly. "A truth that would challenge everything you understood about your family." The cemetery around them seemed to hold its breath, the ancient oak trees standing as silent witnesses to this extraordinary moment of potential revelation. "Are you prepared to hear what your daughter discovered?" Michael asked, offering Richard a final moment of hesitation before crossing a point of no return. The afternoon light continued to shift, creating an almost theatrical backdrop to this extraordinary unfolding of family secrets. The moment stretched between Richard and Michael like a taut emotional wire, vibrating with unspoken revelations. Richard's perfectly structured world, built on years of calculated decisions and emotional restraint, trembled on the edge of complete transformation. "The truth Sophia discovered," Michael began, his voice carefully modulated, "challenges the very foundation of your family's identity." He pulled out a series of documents, birth certificates, immigration records, diplomatic communications, each piece a fragment of a complex puzzle. The papers revealed intricate connections that suggested something far more profound than a simple family history. Elena's lineage, Michael explained, was not just about diplomatic networks. It was about a specific genetic and cultural heritage that had been carefully hidden for generations. The documents suggested that Elena's true background was a blend of multiple cultural identities. She was not simply the woman Richard had married. She was a product of a complex international network of relationships with roots that stretched across continents. Sophia's research had uncovered a stunning revelation. Elena had been born under a different name, to parents who were themselves part of an extraordinary global network of information brokers and cultural mediators. "Your wife had been carefully reconstructing her identity," Michael continued, "protecting not just herself but a legacy that extended far beyond your family." The implications were staggering. Eleanor had not just created a new life, she had strategically positioned herself within a complex network of global relationships, using her marriage to Richard as another layer of protection. "Sophia discovered something more," Michael said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A truth about her own identity that would change everything." Richard's mind reeled. The carefully constructed narrative of his family, the suburban perfection, the seemingly traditional life, began to dissolve like mist in morning sunlight. "What truth?" Richard asked, his voice a mixture of fear and desperate curiosity. Michael's eyes held a depth of knowledge that suggested the answer would fundamentally alter Richard's understanding of his entire existence. "Sophia was not just your daughter," he said slowly, each word carefully chosen. "She was a product of a much more complex genetic and cultural heritage." The cemetery around them seemed to fade, becoming a backdrop to this extraordinary moment of potential revelation. Ancient oak trees stood as silent witnesses, their branches creating intricate shadows that seemed to dance with the weight of untold secrets. "The connection," Michael continued, "goes beyond what you could have ever imagined. Sophia's true identity is something that will challenge everything you believe about your family." Richard leaned forward, his entire being focused on uncovering the final piece of this extraordinary puzzle. The delicate thread of family history hung in the balance, ready to unravel completely. "Tell me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The afternoon light continued to shift, creating an almost theatrical backdrop to this extraordinary unfolding of family secrets. Everything Richard thought he knew was about to be transformed forever. The final revelation hung in the air, pregnant with possibility and transformation. Richard Hartley, the man who had built his life on precision and control, now stood at the precipice of a truth that would redefine everything. "Sophia was not just your biological daughter," Michael said softly, "but a carefully orchestrated connection between two extraordinary family networks." The documents Michael presented told a story more complex than Richard could have ever imagined. Eleanor had been part of an international network that strategically managed genetic and cultural connections. Sophia's birth was not just a family event, but a carefully planned integration of two powerful lineages. "Your daughter knew she was part of something larger," Michael explained. "She wasn't running away. She was protecting the delicate balance of these international connections." The truth unfolded like an intricate tapestry. Sophia had discovered her true heritage, a blend of diplomatic bloodlines that extended far beyond traditional family structures. She had chosen to disappear not out of rejection, but to preserve the complex network her parents were part of. "She wants to reconnect," Michael said, producing a final envelope, "but on her terms." Richard's hands trembled as he opened the document. Sophia's words were carefully crafted, revealing a path to reconciliation that respected the complexity of their family's history. "Dad," the letter began, "what I'm about to share is not a rejection, but an invitation to understand a much larger story." The letter detailed a plan. Sophia had been working within the same international networks her mother had navigated. Her disappearance was a strategic move to protect both her family and the complex global connections they represented. "I'm ready for you to know the full truth," the letter continued, "but it must happen carefully, strategically." Michael produced a phone number, a secure communication channel that would allow Richard to reconnect with his daughter. Not as a traditional father might, but as a participant in a much larger, more complex narrative. The cemetery around them seemed to breathe with the weight of revelation. Richard Hartley, the man who had controlled every aspect of his professional life, now found himself completely vulnerable, standing at the beginning of a new journey. "Are you ready?" Michael asked, offering the phone number like a bridge between past and future. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the memorial markers, Richard understood that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The carefully constructed walls of his life were crumbling, revealing a world far more fascinating than he could have ever imagined. He took the phone number, his fingers tracing the digits that would reconnect him with a daughter he thought he had lost.